So last year I was about to lower my arse into this rock pool when this huge eel shot out of it, for which I'm incredibly grateful, as not only did he warn me of its inhabitants, but he also inspired this story. And I really think this one is pretty good, so I hope that I do it justice here. So this story is about this eel and his life in this rock pool with rounded sides that had been sculpted by the endless tides. It was lined with shells that had been discarded by glamorously housed hermits as they'd outgrown them. And from the outside, other crabs would peer in enviously, and in doing so serve themselves upon the impressive table of those who resided, and could bear to launch themselves from their comfort to the sobering dryness of the outside world. This eel being one of them. But as plenty as it was in indulgence, it was in prejudice. And so priors were inherited like the limited number of genes trapped within the rock pool. And no resident wanted to budge, and they had the means to make sure that they couldn't be. So when the tide came in, they could journey out and explore, and they'd take with them little drips of sand that they'd collect from their doorways, and its glisten and cleanness would allow them to make outrageous trades on the outside world. So for pittance, they'd be able to do things like ride along on swordfish or invite electric eels to give them light. And even, really anything. They'd even be able to eat children just to have a drip of this precious sand from inside. And it was so fun to travel and to meet other travellers and to visit as many different reefs as possible, to see how people lived in different seas, and to taste new foods and even bring some of the best back. Souvenirs made the rock pool a seemingly multicultural emporium of curiosities and sacred treasures from across the oceans, while, ironically, hosting creatures who were almost all born and raised within the rock pool. And so for those who didn't ask, they'd think, wow, many of these artifacts were, for those who didn't ask, many of these artifacts were considered native to the ledge where they stood. And they would think, wow, you must be so clever and inspiring to have made a life for our society that is so rich in culture and knowledge. So this eel, he thought he was thriving. He was juggling things rather nicely in the pool between his jaunts to visit intact reefs, preferring those with relatively few inhabitants, so as to have a break from his busy social schedule within the pool. Though eventually, he overworked himself, this eel. To him, work was a winner, as a way of showing love to and getting away from his family in one go. Perfect. Though he would dread their uproar at his avoidance, enough to bring them with him on his trips sometimes. But on this trip, he went alone, for a real time out. And as this weekend break drew to a close, and he felt the tides turn, he roused himself from his fin massage and gathered his things, and then noticed the time. The hotel staff knew he was not happy. And despite stopping for nothing and no one while he zipped back, as he honed in on his channel home, he had to acknowledge that it was too late. He had missed the high tide by a margin, and just too much to be worth the risk of launching himself over the rocks, he thought, seeing the seabirds soaring above. And he looked around him and embarked upon his night, navigating the settlements that had formed as beings had flocked to be near the glamorous rock pools, in hope that their earnings from this kind of work may help the life that they'd left behind. The eel reinforced a dam that held back waves of vulnerability inside of him. And so he went for a drink. He met beings who made him laugh, some who made him feel uneasy, and others that really unnerved him a little. He caught himself tense a few times. He felt he was beyond all familiarity amongst the faces that lay behind the hospitality masks, usually worn by those he met. And they watched, intrigued, to see him writhe in the unknown waters beyond his turf. He just didn't really know how to be, how to interact with fish outside of his mould, contorted by assumptions. But some of those that he encountered met him with a tolerance, and in this humbling process of being welcomed when he felt so out of his depth, and the honesty of the things that they shared together about their experiences, and in answering his questions that bubbled to the surface as the rocks at the seabed of his mind were nudged slightly. He was able to understand a little more about what he thought, and how he had been perceiving and responding to the world around him. So it was quite the evening, not plain sailing, but something in him shifted with the tides. And so he took his time, meandering back through the bleached coral, and in the burning morning heat, on return to the rock pool, and wondered, had he really tried to catch the end of the last high tide? Or had he actually maybe sort of made this happen, though his mind did defend that it had tried its best? And he smiled as he came back, though the panic of his family at his lack of return had fermented into pain, putrefied into resentment, and met him, though he calmly tried to explain where he had been and what he felt he had uncovered about the madness that they bathed in, and the lies that had to be born and cherished to truly enjoy the indulgence and excess and closeness of the pool. It was stagnant. For the most part, they weren't interested. And shortly after his return, he was out with his pals, and they stopped by a club where jellyfish danced enticingly. One jeered some slander as they gawked about their kind and grabbed at their voluptuous bodies, crassly and without care, and the eel took it upon himself to chime up. This friend replied from a place of aggression, letting him know that that point of view was pretty inconvenient, actually, and that jellyfish don't even have brains, so who cares what you say around them anyway? Well, I care, said the eel, because we have power in this situation, and I don't want to use it to cultivate this energy and expose it to these mothers, sisters, and wives, just trying to support themselves while we live in plenty. He caught himself realizing that he was describing the fish before him through his frame of reference, in his context in their context with the relationship with in the context of their relationship with menfish, and was humbled. So he graciously accepted his exile from the social group that had succeeded in keeping him buoyant, keeping him occupied, and his status buoyant within the pool. But the illusions that had seen value in these superficial relationships had been shattered. And the endless woes that they shared seemed so trivial compared to what he had seen fish survive with a smile on the outside. And he went on battling this balance between feeling a responsibility to use his language of the rock pool, to speak for some of the beings that he'd met beyond its walls, and the acknowledgement that he himself was not enlightened. and still had plenty of hypocrisy to work out in himself. And as he had strained in trying to wrench his loved ones, happy in their stupor, from what he perceived as a quagmire of fear and meaningless harm, their indifference and irritation had shot arrows that he had almost allowed to wound him. And so, kissing the fins of those he had felt he had had a duty to, he bowed and left the rock pool, respecting the feeling that he may not have the strength to resist being stifled in making changes that he could in his life, that is, to work his own shit out if he stayed in that environment. Though he swam always with faith in his heart that when right, they would join him. All he could take with him was his will, courage, open heart, and spirit. And that's the story of the eel, tentatively named A Fish Out of Water.